currently observing Ramadan. And then if you could for me, because I do like to keep things fairly interactive, if you could say hello or welcome in the chat in whatever language is most familiar to you. Give it a minute. Got a howdy and a hola. Hola, ¿cómo está? Salam, salam, Blaine. Salud. Hello, everybody. Hola todos. Fantastic. Bienvenue. Awesome. Ciao. Ahlan wa salam, Nesma. Fantastic. Give it a few more responses. Okay. Well, thank you and welcome to the power of collective imagination. I do like to keep my presentations fairly interactive. And so I will ask you to stay in the chat because there's some things that we will actually, that we will do together. So let me first start with what is the power of collective imagination? It's a concept that I developed more than 10 years ago as a method to disarm those who declare dissenting opinions about the value of diversity. I've been involved in diversity for a really long time, when it was just diversity, before it became diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I have been involved in these discussions for a full 25 years now. And here we are in 2025 with not just opinions, but now also a very poorly written and inaccurate executive order that lacks truth and validity. And so what we're going to do over the next 30 minutes, we're going to take a deep and meaningful look into the attributes of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how leaders can utilize the power of collective imagination to build organizations that experience the benefits of collective imagination. And so again, we will be in the chat. I'm going to be asking some questions, certainly looking for some engagement. So stay close to your chat room. The definition that I created around this particular concept is the benefits gained, the creativity that is amplified, the wins that are realized, and the lives that are enriched when everyone is able to contribute in thoughtful and coordinated ways. And I want to center on this word power, and I was very intentional about using this light bulb as an icon. And so when you think about going to the store, buying a light bulb, or just having a light bulb in your house, when you have it in your hand, it is just a light bulb. But the minute you plug it into that socket and you switch on that power, it creates illumination. The power of collective imagination is the same thing. When you get connected to the right organization and with the right people, you certainly have an opportunity to make an impact. Let me start with just a little bit around my diversity journey, a little bit about me. So I am the youngest of 11 children. I have 9 sisters and 1 brother. And I am not exaggerating when I tell you I have every variety of sister: hair color, hair type, hair length, the types of clothes, like their glam style, makeup, jewelry, shoes. As a child, I played in every version of tennis shoes, stiletto, and platform that there was. Like, there was not a shoe that I would stay out of. Among my siblings and I, cooks, singers, musicians, softball players, basketball players, a little bit of everything. And all of these things really shaped who I am and what I seek to create by way of corporate environments, but the things, the environment that I want to also provide to anyone that I collaborate with. Diversity for me was very an essential part of life, just in general. It was not a hard concept for me to adopt or champion, and it most certainly really prepared me for corporate America. And so it felt normal, and it continues to feel normal for me to embrace and celebrate everybody's unique characteristics. A little bit more about my career. And so Angie mentioned in my bio, I've worked for a number of companies, Nationwide Insurance Company, which is insurance and financial services company. I worked for Honda, which is an automobile manufacturing company. I've worked for several aerospace organizations, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and then GE Aviation, and then NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And where I am currently in my career is at the University of California, Irvine, in two roles. I'm a senior member of the HR leadership team, but also an instructor in the Department of Continuing Education. My work has allowed me to work for the globally recognized organizations. And so in particular, I want to talk about my time at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, at Raytheon, and then also here at the University of California. So while working here at UCI, I began as an instructor in 2017, and then I transitioned to the HR role in 2020, a few months after COVID started. And so from March, around mid-March or so, through the end of December, the world was still dealing with a global pandemic. And so by January, there was a vaccine available. And so as one of the larger sites here in Orange County, we were asked to host one of the community-based vaccine clinics, not at the hospital, but here on campus, because the hospital was very busy providing care. In our community vaccine clinic, we had to be prepared to engage anybody who arrived that was seeking vaccination services. Across the 90 or so team members who were here, very organically, we were able to engage people who spoke English, Spanish, Arabic, Farsi, Chinese, both Mandarin and Cantonese, Japanese, Tagalog, and even sign language. And let me tell you about this. We were out recruiting to make sure that we were fully staffed for a vaccine clinic. There were a number of flight attendants who had been furloughed because there wasn't a lot of commercial travel. We hired a young man named Jonathan. Now, when you think about a university, a hospital, a vaccine clinic, you know, how could a flight attendant fit in here in our environment? We were in community engagement, and so Jonathan had the perfect skills for that. What we found out very organically is that Jonathan also knew sign language. And so there was a day that some people seeking vaccines arrived. They were hearing impaired. They needed someone who was familiar with sign language. And just very spontaneously, Jonathan was able to help us out. And so, again, in my career, I have had an opportunity to work among people who had a variety of unique characteristics, and those actually helped us be better at what we're doing. While I worked at JPL, so NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, so JPL is an operating division of Caltech, but it is one of the NASA labs. I worked with some of the most amazing people, two of which, Tracy Drain and Mugage Cooper. So please find them on LinkedIn and connect with them. Tracy is a systems engineer, and one of the reasons why she stands out for me, she was a technical consultant for the movie Hidden Figures. And so when you think about the messaging of Hidden Figures, where there were women of color who clearly had a skill set, that skill set was highly valued, but were sometimes treated in a very marginalized way. I watched Tracy tell me her story about how even as a young child, she was just fascinated by space. And because she was very good academically, it led her to her undergraduate and graduate degree programs, and then ultimately to work at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Mugage Cooper, if you find her profile as well, her title is Planetary Protection Engineer. And so again, an amazing career. And if you're following her, if you are already following her or start following her, you also know she lived in the Altadena area. And so the fires that occurred in January, Mugage was one of the people who unfortunately lost her home. So please, please, please connect with Tracy and Mugage because they are amazing people. The last amazing part of my journey that I want to share is when I worked for Raytheon. At that time, we were the primary contractor for the National Science Foundation. And so I managed the recruiting team that hired all of the contractors that go to Antarctica, to the 3 stations and then the research vessels. So McMurdo Station, Palmer Station, and then also South Pole, and then the research vessels. And so during my deployment, I was contacted by BK Grant. She was at the time the South Pole director. And so BK, if you are looking for her, her first name is Betty, but you may find her under BK. She knew that I was at the main station working on a staffing plan for the next season. And so she called me and said, there's a bed space available for 3 days. Would you like to come to South Pole? And I said, absolutely yes. And so a woman in a senior leadership role recognized the work that I was doing and provided this invitation to me. And so for 3 days in 2008, I spent time at South Pole. And let me tell you, this picture does not do justice to how cold it is. I'm a Midwest girl. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, but I can tell you for sure, 35 below is not a comfortable temperature at all, but it is one of the most proud moments I have, because not only have I been to a continent that most people don't have an opportunity to visit, but I was actually able to go to the South Pole. So let's talk about this intersection between diversity, equity, inclusion, and what I call imagination. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is supported by the power of collective imagination, because it's rooted in all of the individual characteristics that we possess. On the surface, we tend to hear about the most common characteristics that are promoted through diversity, equity, and inclusion. So gender, ethnicity, religion, education, veteran status, physical ability, and sexual orientation. And I'm very particular about word choice. Sometimes we will often hear the word disability, and I'm not a fan of that term. I just prefer physical ability, because whatever abilities you have, people will make the most of those to still have an impactful life. But physical ability and then sexual orientation. What I'd like to also expose you to are some additional unique characteristics that have an impact on how people are able to contribute to a team or to an organization. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about dominant hand, whether or not you're left or right-handed, birth order and how that might impact the way in which you interact and problem solve, or just your perspective on the world, if you are part of a blended, adopted, or foster family. And then also what your vision or color spectrum might be and how that contributes to being part of a team. So let me start with one of the things, again, having lived all across the country, also having traveled all across the world, I am a foodie. I love good food. I will try anything once. And when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think about the way in which I approach when I get to a new city and I'm certainly staring at a menu and I'm asking questions about what are all of the ingredients in a particular item. I like things spicy. I like things well flavored. I like things that are handmade. And so when I think about the way in which we enjoy food, the more ingredients you have, the more care that a chef really puts into something certainly makes a meal or a dish much more savory. And I like to take that same approach when I think about working with teams or creating a teams. I want as diverse a variety of people as possible, because I want my team to be as fantastic as possible. So I want to talk about eggs for a second. And you're probably like, wait, she just said she loves food. Why are we talking about eggs? I'm going to tell you my egg story. What do eggs have to do with diversity? So if you're a person who cooks, you know that eggs serve a purpose, not necessarily for taste, but for function. They are a binding agent. And so for me, I put eggs in my macaroni and cheese. I think it's important, certainly when you're baking a cake. Eggs in a cake or most dishes will give the item rise. It helps it rise when you bake it. I look at diversity the same way. And where people have attempted to minimalize diversity as icing on the cake, and I'm like, no, diversity is eggs in the cake. Like you have to have eggs in the cake to really make sure that that cake rises and it's full and all of the ingredients really form together. And so this is why I like to talk about eggs when I am talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Quick question, if you can, in the chat, if you are left-handed, if you could just say, I am left-handed in the chat. And I'm looking in the chat. I have some Ohio people, OHIO. I'm sorry that I missed that while I was presenting. But if you are a left-handed person in the chat, if you can just say left-handed or put your name in the chat for me. Brianna, thank you, Brianna. Dipti, thank you. So let me tell you why I talk about being left-handed. So about 10% of the population is left-handed. In some of my research, what I learned is about a fourth of the Apollo astronauts, like in the 60s, were left-handed. There's also a holiday specifically to celebrate people who are left-handed. It is August 13th. So the reason why I talk about being left-handed is because people who are left-handed see and experience the world in a very different way. As a student, if you were at a desk that was really configured for a right-handed person, being left-handed makes that really hard. If you are writing and you are moving your hand over what you just wrote, that can make it really challenging as well. In some of my research I've done about people who are left-handed, there was an early version of the iPhone that was very difficult to use because of where the buttons were placed specifically for left-handed people. Because I've spent so much time in engineering organizations, understanding that we're creating products that people have to use, I have seen time and time again where it is so important for design teams to include someone who was left-handed because they see and function in a very different way. Here's a question for anybody who is not left-handed. Did you grow up in a household with someone who was left-handed? And in doing so, you felt like they always left something in the wrong place? So that's a quick question. Anybody grow up in a household with someone who is left-handed, a parent or a sibling? Or maybe you have a spouse that is left-handed or a significant other. Marna says, yeah, Dab's left-handed. So for those of you who grew up in a house with someone who was left-handed, was the ironing board always turned the wrong way for you? I said, no, okay. So maybe you guys had conditioned your left-handed person. Oh, okay, fantastic. So the reason why I bring this up is, and I'm going to go back to what I talked about, people with dissenting opinions. Early in my days of being a diversity champion, I would start talking to people and automatically people were like, don't come in here telling me I'm racist or I'm sexist. And so I had to find a way to disarm people. And I said, well, let's talk about people who are left-handed. And immediately they were like, that's not a diversity characteristic. It absolutely is. And if you talk to people who are left-handed, they will tell you the number of times that they have not been considered. Left-handed baseball gloves, left-handed batters. In kindergarten, I distinctly remember that the left-handed scissors were a very specific color because at 5 and you're still just learning kind of, manual dexterity, it is so important to make sure, am I handing you the right scissors? And so I talk about being left-handed as a way to help people see they're not different. They have a unique characteristic, much like everybody else. And we want to make sure we're considering their perspective and what we're doing, products that we're creating, and then certainly also services that we are providing as well. Thank you. I'm watching you guys in the chat. Thank you so much. One of the other areas I like to talk about when talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion is color blindness. So I'm going to skip to the bottom of my slide here really quickly. I'm also a movie buff. I love good movies. The Hangover series is one of my favorite series of movies. In The Hangover Part 3, there's a scene where Stu and Mr. Chow have broken into Leslie's house, and they need to disarm the alarm system. And they are across from each other. And he's giving directions about which which wire to cut. And in that moment, they find out that Mr. Chow admits that he's colorblind. And so he was like, nope, they're all some shade of gray. And I was like, this is exactly what I'm talking about, especially in design teams. For any of you who are engineers in my group, when you have a colorblind or a left-handed person on your team, how much more it exposes in what you're doing in your design. And even if you add words to things that are labeled with a color, if there's not enough color contrast, that person may not still be able to see those words. So having a person who is colorblind that's part of your team, extraordinarily important. Let me give you another example here. Let's talk about blind spots. And so a lot of times you hear this term when you're driving, like somebody is over your shoulder and you can't really see them, but now cars are very sophisticated. There's that little blind spot detection on the side mirror. But this blind spot is an actual thing, but it's also a concept when you're thinking about problem solving and design. So it's relative to your field of vision, how far up or down you can see, and then how far to the side that you can see. When I talk about blind spot as a concept, what I'm talking about is really, as I'm problem solving, as I'm sourcing information, we only think around our experience, based on our experiences and our education. But if you have multiple people in a group, everybody's blind spots around problem solving are very different, and you're likely to be able to cover each other's blind spots. And I like this particular picture because what it shows you is where one person's blind spot begins, another person ends. So again, the power of collective imagination. How can we work together to close each other's blind spots? Now I'm going to take you to Saturday morning, 1977. I loved cartoons on Saturday morning. The Super Friends included a brother and sister who had superpowers. The sister could change herself into the form of any animal, and the brother could change himself into any form of water. And they would work together with their powers to fight whoever the bad guys are. And so my question to everybody in the group, at work, who was your super twin? Put their name in the chat for me. At work, there's somebody that you're always on chat with. There's somebody that you guys are in good trouble together. Thank you, Daniel and Tim. Thank you, Donna. And so having Scott, Gina, having somebody that's your partner, that's your creative partner, that you put your minds together to get things accomplished is extraordinarily important. Couple more things, and I have a homework assignment for everybody also. Diversity Inc. magazine started over 20 years ago, and they actually published a magazine. And one of the things that they would do is rank the top 50 companies. And so data collection, workforce, leadership, talent development, employee resource groups, supplier diversity, policy and practice. And I would comb through because I wanted to know as much as possible about what these companies were doing. And one of the things that I always understood is these companies were able to leverage diversity by allowing people to really be their talented, exceptional selves on a regular basis to the benefit of the organization. And so it's a great place to go do research. So a couple questions for you in the chat, if you could again, what's your diversity superpower? What is that one attribute about yourself or skill that you know when you're able to really utilize that, it helps your team be better and it helps your company be better? You could be great at Excel pivot tables. You could be the person who has mastered AI, over the past year. But I'd love to just see in the chat, what is your superpower that you are always willing to share with your team and with your peers to be able to be a much more dynamic team? Who's my AI guru who's in our group today? Donna says she's a good listener. Donna, you know what? That is a skill to be celebrated. Thank you. Knowledge sharing. Dion, thank you, Dion. You said empathy. But let's also talk about those people who have good empathy, typically keep Kleenex in their office as well. So thank you, Dion. Beatrice says she speaks 6 languages. Thank you, Beatrice. Is it kinetic feeler? Marna, did I pronounce that correctly? Active listening, empathetic leader. Fantastic. Thank you. Use your superpowers. Do not take them for granted. Couple more things that I want to share with everybody now. This is your call to action. Understanding that diversity, equity, and inclusion has been villainized in a very intentional way, and it is absolutely never intended to create harm, to marginalize people. And so I want everyone to feel empowered and emboldened in this time to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the most positive way. The power of collective imagination is just that. When working together with others whose attributes, talents, and skills are amplified, how is your organization better? How is your organization more competitive? And what methods of organizational sustainability are amplified through sound design and flawless execution? One of the things I also want you to be aware of, inclusion is not exclusion. Nobody has to be left out. Everybody can participate. So my call to action to everyone today is lean into these current challenges. If you know, believe, and have experienced the benefits of a well thought out and deeply rooted DEI strategy, please have courage to validate and defend it. If you are a person who may still possess a degree of skepticism, I encourage you to connect with those of us who have been day one champions and allow yourself space to learn and grow. Here's your homework. And I want you to connect with me on LinkedIn to turn in your homework. In your teams this week or next week, you have 3 questions or 3 topics to talk about. Identify that the power of collective imagination exists in your organization. I want you to identify wins that have occurred. And I also want you to identify goals that can be achieved by leveraging the power of collective imagination. So this is my last slide. I would not be here without Kendrick Lamar being part of my presentation today. So Angie, I will pause here and we can open it up for any questions that anybody has.
Does anyone have any questions? I guess we'll look in the chat. And if there are no questions, I can ask a few questions.
And I did put my LinkedIn profile in the chat in case anybody would like to connect with me to turn in their homework.
Mm-hmm. Dipti asked, can you share more analogies like the egg related to power of collective imagination?
Can you share more analogy like another analogy? Well, I'll talk about a family. Like I said, I'm from a very big family. My last name is Jones. My maiden last name is Jones. My parents never required us to be anything specific other than the fact that we always had to remember we were a Jones. And so you could be a softball player, but remember you are a Jones. You could be a musician, but remember you are a Jones. And so when I think about our teams, you're like, I work for UCI. In my role, I talk about what I do as a talent strategy director. I know I do that under the umbrella of UCI. And so when I talk to people about being able to leverage their superpower or what their talents are, that talent is always aligned to helping your organization to be elevated and amplified. And so that's my family analogy that I like to use.
I have a question about, let's see. What's a tech buzzword that you want to ban? Or which tech buzzword?
I think I'm over hearing people talk about scale. We need to scale it. Needs to be scalable. We need to grow.
Okay.
We need the right size. We need to be flexible. But I feel like people use it in an attempt to seem more haughty or like more I think people are enamored with themselves when they use the word. And so it is a word that I am not fond of.
Thank you for pointing that
Um,
out. The Masters of
Amy,
Scale podcast, for example.
I see Amy's question. What's one piece of career advice you'd give your younger self? I love this question. I think most people who know me now know that I am unapologetically myself. And I wish I had learned that earlier in my career, but I think I was so mystified by the thought of corporate America. I felt like I needed to be safe in my demeanor and in my championing of things. And what I learned very quickly in some environments, corporate America don't care about you. So if something is wrong, you are being wrong, you see other people being wronged, you feel like it's time for you to advocate for yourself, learn to live in your boldness. You get one life, and I want you, when you take your last breath, to know that you have gotten the absolute most out of your life.
So, a question is, um, if your job had a warning label, what would it say?
Well, I'm not always good with work-life balance. And so the warning label is really creating work-life balance. There's a scripture in the Quran that says Allah had given us the night to rest and light in the day to work. And that's a real distinction. And so being involved in this work makes you want to be more involved. And sometimes it's hard to step away. And so that warning label would be make sure that you are setting boundaries around work-life balance.
And what is your go-to I need a break activity during the workday?
I work really close to a mall, a very nice mall. And so there are times that I'm either at the mall or potentially at Mastro's or Cheesecake Factory.
That's right, you're by South Coast Plaza.
I am South Coast and Fashion Island.
Oh, wow.
Yes, yes, this is a very dangerous place to be.
Um, and let's see, what is the weirdest Slack or Teams message you've ever received?
Oh, so every company I've ever worked in, there have been more than one Kim. Every single place. And the number of times I received a message intended for another Kim, a grocery list, can you pick up the kids? What exactly did you mean by what you just texted me? And I'm like, I wasn't the person that texted you, sorry. And so not in an intentional way, but just being Kim is a very common generational name. But I've been the wrong intended person for a text message.
Amy has a good question. How can
Mm.
companies balance psychological safety for employees while navigating external anti-DEI pressure?
Ooh,
Either
Amy, thank you
warnings
for
or
this
cautionary
question.
tales.
So first and foremost, your leadership team has to be gatekeepers of this. If I am asking you to come and work for my company, produce a product, provide a service, and you're here virtually or in person for 40 hours a week, I need you to be safe in this environment. And so, in a very unabashed way, people have to stand flat-footed and advocate for people. And so, psychological safety is real. The same way we say, I need to take a day off because I sprained my ankle or I have a headache, your psychological safety is as important and is as visible as I cut myself and I need stitches. And so there should never be any double speak, any timidness in your leadership team, providing an environment where people are psychologically safe and holding people accountable when they don't create and maintain a safe environment.
That's good. Thank you. There's a question from Bree. We know diversity makes stronger, more productive work environments, but while we're in this
Mhm.
period of backlash or backsliding, have you had to change the way you approach your work?
Nope. I will never apologize for celebrating people for who they are. When you read through the executive order, it specifically called out race. It said it was rooted in racism, it was wasteful, and it was harmful. And I know in the 25 years that I've been involved in diversity, equity, inclusion work, I have not harmed intentionally or unintentionally a white man. I know that I have not done that because my goal is to always make sure everybody who is talented, who has something to contribute, is provided an opportunity. And so I am not changing anything because I have not done anything wrong and I have no intentions on doing anything wrong. So I intend to weather this storm because I think it is a storm that we will navigate our way through. But now is not the time to be a coward at all.
Thank you. A question that I liked asking in the last few minutes is, what's a community or resource that's made a big difference in your career?
Um, can you read me the question again?
Yeah, what's a community or resource that made a difference in your career?
Oh man, because I've lived all over the country, I've also been a recruiter. I've traveled a lot. I have this cohort, super friends group of people that I can call that I trust with my life. Like, hey, I need some advice. And so this group of women, mostly women, there's couple guys in the group too. But those days that you are second guessing yourself, you've made a mistake, you're trying to, navigate your way through. You need to think out loud. Having 3 or 4 or 6 people who know you, who have permission to be honest with you, is what will really get you through. That has actually, been able to get me through where I've been navigating in my career as well.
Thank you for sharing that. So it's about
Mary said, "No
having
coward shall prosper." Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. I'm sorry, Angie. You were
no
talking.
worries. I was just saying thank you for sharing that. Do you have a term for your posse or your group or your, I know people sometimes say board of like directors or like your crew.
Sanctuary and vibe.
Sanctuary and vibe.
Sanctuary and vibe.